Welcome everybody on this Thursday. It is February 24th, 2022. You're here for the Culture Mastery webinar on doing business with Germany, or maybe more precisely on doing business with the German-speaking world, because you might not be doing business with people in Germany. You might be doing business with German speakers or people from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and some of the other countries that I identify here on this first slide, who are doing business with you outside of the German-speaking world. So there's many different combinations in which you might encounter the cultures that are associated with the German speakers. And you may have noticed I said cultures, plural, because there is not such a thing as one German culture. German as a language is spoken by some 130, 140 million people around the world. Only 82, 83 million of them are residents of the country of Germany. So you also see here the flags of Austria, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Switzerland. These are all countries in which German is an officially recognized language. There are also countries in which German is not the dominant language, and the German culture is not the dominant culture. And yet, given the space and official recognition that the German language has in these countries, you can also assume that there are some traits present in these countries that pertain to what we would call the German culture. It may not be German in the way that we expect in Germany. It may be a bit different. However, it might be quite influenced by German speaking or German culture that we can identify in Germany. So forgive me if I sometimes group Germans into a larger basket. My Swiss and Austrian friends will hopefully forgive me for doing so. I am not saying that Germans are like Austrians or the German-speaking Swiss. And yet there are certain traits that German speakers across borders have in common. And yet we will see that there are also some significant differences that we need to pay attention to. So I'm curious to find out in which capacity you are connecting with people that identify as German speakers, who have German as their first language, or maybe who are German. So let everybody know, let me know in the chat, how do you presently work with Germans or any of the other nationalities, and how it is affecting your day-to-day. So when you cross cultures, when we step into an environment where our culture, our native culture, is not the one that is universally represented in the group of people that we work with, we are dealing with some people call it cultural shock. I'm refraining from that term because shocking it is probably not. And yet you're approaching foreign lands, you're entering uncharted territory. I'm using this image because it might remind you, some of you, of the German Autobahn, which is kind of proverbial for some German traits. So you will recognize behaviors that are not like yours, that are unfamiliar, unknown, uncommon, unpleasant, sometimes, maybe even unacceptable to you. Now, you might instinctively gravitate to a mind chatter that says, well, that's not normal. The way they do it is not the way I do it, because the way I do it is obviously the right way. How they do it must be different, must be wrong, and therefore not normal. And I would like to remind you that normal is only an arbitrary definition of a set of behavioral standards that a group decides upon, right? Some groups find certain behaviors acceptable, others don't. And when we enter different cultures, when we work with people from different cultures, we will encounter inevitably behaviors that we don't understand at first, that we may not like at first, or that we have severe concerns over. So the webinar will show you what the initial steps will be to decipher some of these idiosyncrasies or some of these disconnects and mismatches, just because it's unfamiliar and uncommon or maybe unpleasant to you doesn't mean that the behavior in and by itself is wrong. There might just be a different context under which people operate. So what are we going to do today here? We will identify some of the main cultural values of Germany and that of the United States. My name is Christian. I should have mentioned that maybe a little earlier. My name is Christian. I run this company, knowing where to point here, The Culture Mastery, and you probably know this because you're here and you came across my work somehow or somebody recommended it to you. So if that is the case, thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here. I know lots of us have other stuff to do today. Why am I comparing United States and Germany? Mainly because our company is based in the United States. I myself am German by cultural origin. So these two poles ring true for many of our clients, of our friends. Now, please know that what we're going to identify here does not only pertain to the US in comparison to the German-speaking world. It can apply to our northern friends in Canada just as much as to our southern friends in Mexico or anywhere in the world. We have people here from Russia, from Denmark, from, I'll have to go through the list. There's a couple of you from countries outside of the US or Germany. So I'm starting this observation with this transatlantic comparison. Keep in mind, though, that many of the things we're going to highlight here today pertain to any type of comparison that you may want to make with Germany or the German-speaking world. So once we identify those cultural values, we also want to know how these values impact the way we operate, how we communicate with each other, how we build relationships, both at work or for business, how we work together, and how we organize working together, how we manage our work, how we like to manage people, or how we are preferring to be led by others. So all of this is affected by culture. We also want to develop an understanding for how these cultural dynamics affect our day-to-day business. And I'm going to show you some tools by which you can first measure these cultural mismatches or disconnects, and how those tools can help you minimize those gaps and close the culture gap with the German-speaking world. Let me check in with you here. Some of you are making a little bit more pronounced what their background is. We have Alan here from Michigan. Hey, Alan, he's working globally. Yes. Leon, our Southern German friend who's working in Canada. Nancy's from Mexico. Stephanie says, I am the man. Well, I am a man. The man, that remains to be seen, but thanks. Sarah says she's half German and American. Well, Sarah, I guess you have a story or more to tell about this. Ken, US citizen who works as a German-speaking businessman. Yes. Thank you all for giving me a little bit more texture and flavor around who you are, what you do, and how this topic is relevant to you. Excellent. Thank you. So you see it on the banner behind me, you see it on the slide here. If we don't get culture, get in the sense of understanding, being able to hold on to grasp it, to have an intellectual, emotional, both heart and mind connection to culture, culture will eventually get us, right? It will get us in the way that we will run into mistakes. We will make mistakes, and these mistakes can be costly, especially in the transatlantic business world. There are several cautionary tales that some of you might very well be familiar. You may have heard of the big German automotive manufacturer with a star in the logo that went to Detroit and bought another car company with also, I think, some kind of a star in their logo, and declared it to be a merger of equals, and it turned out to be everything but. It was a cross-cultural disaster, which eventually led to the divorce of this marriage between a German and a US auto manufacturer. We have seen lots and lots of transatlantic businesses fail because first they assume similarity. You look at North America, whether it's US or Canada, being immigrated or populated by immigrants from largely Europe at first before other nationalities, cultures, and ethnicities decided to come to North America. So both North America and Europe often presume that we have a lot in common. And to a certain degree, that is true. I'm not making this wrong. However, over this presumption of similarity, some of us seem to forget that there are nuances that are significantly different, which can derail our joint projects. So I'm curious, what are some of the challenges that you all are facing in your transatlantic world? Now, I do understand some of these challenges that you're facing in dealing with German speakers may be personal, and you might not be comfortable sharing this in the public chat. You can chat it to me. You can toggle down there where you put your message in there. You can toggle whether you want to send this to everyone or to the host and panelists or just to me. And if in doubt, later on, you'll get my email address and feel free to email me directly if this is something that might be too touchy to discuss as an open forum. But I'm curious to see and read what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing when you're working with German speakers. Barbara says there's a language barrier. Silke says she has the attitude of, quote, we have always done it this way and we will continue to do it this way mentality. Okay, that is typically not a good recipe for accepting change and cultural nuance. Thank you, Silke. Star marriage was a clash of ego, says Susanna. Yes, excellent. So feel free to let me know what your challenge is. Maybe you'll need to think about this a little and figure this out throughout the course of this webinar. Whenever you're ready to share your challenge with us, I'd be happy to be of service to you and help you unpack some of these. Now, a lot of businesses, a lot of people who do work internationally presume that it's the company that is getting ready for a global role or global business. Now, I think it's important to stress, and I think this shouldn't be news to you if you work in a global context, that it's not your company that's doing the global work, it's the people that work in your organization that do the global work. So the global work can only be done successfully if your people, if your employees, your team members, your colleagues, if you yourself are ready for this, if you have the wherewithal, the cultural intelligence, the emotional intelligence, the IQ to do global business. And one of the secret sauces that we're talking about here is cultural competence or cultural intelligence. Because when we do work with cultures that are different from our own, we see the world through our eyes. We see it through our lenses, through our filters that are made up or created through our cultural upbringing, through the environment in which we were raised, the quote unquote normal that was defined by our peers, by our family, by the members of the group in which we grew up, in the culture that we identify with first. Those factors determine the filters of how we see the world, of how we make meaning of our experience. So that means that we don't necessarily see the world as it really is, as this Anais Nin quote reminds us. We don't have an objective view of the world at all times. We have quite a subjective, tainted view of the world based on the cultural filters, based on the information filters that we've built up over a lifetime. So always be aware that no matter how you see the world, there's somebody else who might see the same thing from a different angle and comes to a different conclusion. Does that make that person wrong? Does it make you wrong or right? I doubt it. I think these are simply different approaches and meaning makings of experiences that we have independently. So why does culture matter in global business? Why does this Christian guy always talk about culture? Why does it matter so much to him? Well, as I said earlier, it predetermines our actions. Nothing we do is by accident. We show up in the world the way we do based on how we were educated, based on how we were taught, and based on how we learned to be successful in the past, because we did things the way we did. And got a result, and that result taught us, oh, this worked, nice, I'll keep doing this. This didn't work, maybe I'll do it differently, I'll do it like everybody else in my group, and here we go, success. So the patterns, the behavioral concepts that we practice throughout our lifetime we model that by what we see around us. So the people around us in our culture shape the way we act and behave. So our cultural values impact all our business interactions, how we introduce ourselves, how we make contact with prospective clients, how we create a mutual respect and trust and rapport with one another. How do we tell each other what we like and what we don't like? How do we communicate overall? What's our style? Do we stand close to each other? Do we keep a distance? Do we prefer virtual? Do we turn the camera on the Zoom, or are we hesitant to do that? How do we haggle over the conditions? What are the prices we're willing to pay for a product, service, a widget? How do we define what the KPIs of our solution are? And how do we resolve a disagreement? How do we handle situations where we don't get along or where we don't seem to see eye to eye? How do we make this work? So knowing our cultural preference will be the basis for that. So in any type of cross-cultural interaction, we've got to start with ourselves first, understanding what's my default setting, how do I like to do it? And then let's compare that to how other cultures do that and recognize where there might be a disconnect. Now, you might think you know about culture already, right? You might think, well, hey, I've lived abroad, I've done this, I've done that. We've had clients from this part of the world. So there's that green piece of the pie that you know all this stuff. Good on you. Excellent. And you also know that there is a few things that you still need to learn. That's that bluish piece of the pie. Yes, you know that this is unknown to you at this point, and there's knowledge gaps that you can work on. What most of us fail to recognize at all times, we may subconsciously be aware of it, but we don't always think of it, that there's a huge piece of the picture that we're not even aware of. There's things about culture that we don't even know we don't know. So these are the blind spots of our cultural knowledge. And this is easy to gloss over because we look at the other culture typically by what our system can recognize. So, right, this is a metaphor that's often used in our training programs. If our bodies, our physical existence, is the hardware of humanity, or of in this case, my person, Christian, this is his body. Not beautiful, but this is the hardware that I was equipped with. My operating system that runs this hardware is my culture. So our operating system and our hardware has 5 sensory input systems. I can see, I can hear, I can feel and touch and taste. I can taste and I can smell. So seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, 5 senses. And these 5 senses, my brain and my operating system try to make sense of. This is how I make meaning of the world, right? So look at this dangerous animal, peeking a little bit out of the water. So this is what my senses can pick up. I can pick up, okay, this is a culture that does this. They dress this way. They talk this way. Their food tastes like this. When I enter this place, this city, this office, it smells this way. There are certain sounds. There are certain sights. There are certain tastes and smells. So I can hear the music. I can hear the conversation. I can taste the food and drink. I can see how people dress, how they groom, or how they cover hair or don't, what style of dress they have, how they stand in relation to one another. All of these are, well, here I call them visible factors. We could also call them discernible factors because it's not only vision, it's all our 5 senses. But underneath the water surface, underneath what our senses pick up, are the unrecognizable, the unsensible factors of culture, what our senses simply cannot pick up. How do people think? What do they believe in? What are their value systems? What kind of that's a strong word, philosophical principles do they follow? All of these are elements of culture that are not immediately recognizable. And these are often implicitly learned. This is true for our own culture and that of other cultures. Edward T. Hall, one of the famous pillars of cross-cultural research, said that culture is interesting because it hides a lot more than it reveals. And interestingly enough, it hides effectively from its own members, meaning that I, as a German, often am not aware of my own Germanness. I don't really know what it means, how German I show up. I don't often recognize it in myself. And you probably don't often recognize your own culture in how you show up and how you appear in the world and how you interact. So it's usually the outside view that allows for more self-discovery. In my case, it took me to move away from Germany to become more aware of my Germanness. And those of you who work in an international context can probably attest to that you had similar experiences. So let me check in with you in the chat. We have Heidemarie, who says navigating between both cultures, Mexican and German, is a challenge. Susanne says some cumbersome processes, lack of flexibility. Okay, Joachim says proven success factors in Germany are not as relevant in the US. I would agree. Then we have Kenneth, who says emphasis on quality of individual contribution versus being a team player is rather different. Yep. Viviane just has lots of dots. I'm not sure what Viviane is trying to tell us. Maybe you can specify that. And Alan says that there's a specific intercultural issue that Americans sometimes perceive Germans' sense of correctness as arrogance. Yes, that can be very much the case. Thank you for all of your shares here. Awesome. Moving on. What are some of the cultural disconnects we see in transatlantic business? And these may show up a little more in some cases, a little less in others. So let's be nuanced and let's recognize that these are not similar sized roadblocks. They can come up in different shapes and sizes. But first of all, how much risk are we willing to accept? How much uncertainty are we comfortable with? So there's one culture that is quite okay with risk, another one is not. And we'll figure out which one that is. What's more important, a result, getting that result, or following a process towards a desired outcome? Do we communicate more indirectly or more directly? Do we confront, and is confrontation communication acceptable or is it not? What's more important in our work? Is it more important to complete the task successfully, or is it also important to have and maintain good relationships with the people that collaborate with us? Do we work towards a long-term vision, to a long-term goal, or are we driven by short-term incentives, and do short-term goals matter to us more than the long-term, long distance away vision? Do we communicate more formally or informally? Do we see ourselves as part of a group and therefore sacrifice some individual interests for the sake of the group to which we belong? Or do we care more about our own individual progress and success? And finally, how do we balance out time at work and success and accomplishment and achievement in our professional lives with the non-work life, our families, our social lives? Let me check in here. Silke is wondering if that is a trick question. Well, it could be, but we'll find out. Jochen says criticism and suggestions to improve projects are being received mentally, I guess. Not sure what that is. Yes, fat-fingered. I know the problem. Same here, Jochen. So criticism and suggestions to improve may not be interpreted the same way, right? So do we view the task more important or the relationship? Excellent. Thank you, Jochen. So despite all the nuance that I always remind our clients of, let's see if there are some cultural traits or cultural traditions that we can find throughout the German-speaking world. I try to collect a few. This is an incomplete list. Maybe you have a few more, or maybe you disagree with some of them. Would be interesting to know that in the chat. So some of these crossing over German cultural values that you also see in the German-speaking part of Switzerland and in Austria, a desire for order. Ordnung muss sein. My grandmother implanted that in me. Without order, we have chaos, we have disorder. That is a collective memory of a group of people, because as you know, German history of the 20th century brought a lot of disorder, mainly self-made disorder, if we look at Germany and Austria. So now there is a strong desire for establishing, keeping, and maintaining order. Everything that goes against that is viewed skeptically. With that desire for order comes a communication that is clear and direct, that strives for clarity. You see here the phrase alles klar, all clear. That is a surefire way to express for a German, I have no more questions. You told me everything I need to know, no more ambiguity. Super important. Marcus says a key value is also to be serious, right? To not be flippant. Now, this is changing a little bit with the generations. I might be right there on the edge of these generations. I grew up and was taught to be hyper serious. Now I'm not taking myself too serious anymore, at least sometimes. I'm still working on that. So that is the seriousness factor, not to be ignored. Thank you. Now, it's also a cultural value that Germans, especially in the business world, present themselves as assertive because of their competence, because of their subject matter expertise. So being assertive around your field of work is important. If you're not assertive, then you're a doormat and you probably won't be able to ascend in the corporate rung. Long-term planning is something that most Germans in the business world, not individually, but in a business context, value. Short-term ideas, new shiny objects, chasing those, yeah, maybe nice and maybe appealing, but it doesn't serve our corporate vision, so let's stick to the plan. Punctuality, I mentioned this in the beginning, we started on time, and I am following a process. I am giving you a presentation based on my slide deck. I hope to give it some texture and personality, and yet I choose my own process to do this, right? And then there is a strong belief in common rules and binding rules. This image on the right where it says, Danke an alle, die weiter die Regeln einhalten, loosely translates to thank you for all of those who are still abiding by the rules. I found this in a newspaper, on a website during the pandemic, or during the height of the pandemic, when people were getting weary of following these COVID protocols. And this is a thank you basically to the public. Hey, we know it's hard, but the rules are there for all of us. So we appeal to your Germanness to continuously sticking to them. Pia, thank you for that one. Dienst ist Dienst und Schnaps ist Schnaps. Well, there's many ways to translate this, but work is work and drink is drink. So once we apply ourselves to a revenue generating activity, or once we apply ourselves to the task that is given to us as part of our work, that's when we are serious. Outside of work, the schnapps or the liquor or any type of social interaction that has some looser rules, then those gloves of strictness may come off. So in addition to Marco's comment about Germans' desire for seriousness, that can quickly go away when the work constraints are released. Right. Thank you for that, Pia. Also, common value across the German-speaking world: systems. Everything works by a process. I already mentioned that. These are some visual examples from traffic in Germany. For an outsider, especially if you come from outside of Europe and you drive yourself for the first time in Germany, you will be surprised or maybe struggle. Every expatriate that we've had the pleasure of working with who went to Germany or the German-speaking world for the first time, they called me or emailed me and said, I don't know how to drive myself. I don't know how to navigate myself. This is complicated. This doesn't work like it does at home, because there's a system that does not explain itself automatically. If we don't understand the system in which we're supposed to operate, we will struggle. And remind yourself, if some of you are German speakers here, remind yourself, Your system that you grew up with is inherent to you. You've learned this, you memorized this. I can wake you at 3 a.m. and you know what these traffic signs mean. An outsider doesn't. So keep in mind, when you're dealing with people from another culture, they might not be intuitively familiar with the systems of the host culture. There's a comparison that has often been used in comparing cultures from different areas of the world. This one lends itself basically to a transatlantic comparison: peaches versus coconuts. Goes back to a German Jewish psychologist by the name of Kurt Lewin, and he used these two edible items. I'm not sure if I can call them fruit. I don't know if a coconut is a fruit. I guess it's the fruit of a palm tree. So I guess fruit is okay. So where usually in a training, I would use probably half an hour to go through this exercise, and I would ask all of you to describe the characteristics of a peach to me, and then I would ask you to describe the characteristics of a coconut to me, and how this might be used as a metaphor or an allegory for explaining cultures. I'm going to make it brief here because I want you to get out of here and return to whatever it is you need to do. A peach, you see, is brightly colored, often described as appealingly colored. It's easy to touch. It feels nice and soft in your hand. It's got a fuzzy outside. If it's ripe, you can easily sink your teeth into it. There's juice, there's sweetness, there's substance. There is something there for you immediately. And it's almost hard to resist whether you like a peach or not, but it's like, oh, this looks nice and I want this and I want to engage with this. Inside, however, there's a hard pit, right? This is where the friendliness, the niceness, and the substance ends. And on the other hand, you have a coconut that is, some would say, not as aesthetically pleasing from the outside. It's kind of rough. It's hard. You need the right tools. You need persistence. You need some strategy to get inside. Maybe you need a hammer, maybe a screwdriver or something other, I don't know, whatever you use to open a coconut. And yet inside the coconut, there is sweetness and there is substance and there's juiciness, right? You have the coconut water, you have the coconut meat, and you have all the nutritional value on the inside. And most importantly, no more heart resistance on the inside. So I think you know where I'm going with this. Germans tend to be described a little bit more on the coconut side. And to be precise, I put this palm tree picture here on the left-hand side. You see the coconut, the way it usually hangs on the palm tree, or when it is harvested, that's what it looks like. It has this husk around it, which is a little bit dry, a little bit fibrous. It's not juicy, but it's also not immediately hard and resistant, right? So there is a little bit to work with the Germans. There might be a little bit of small talk. There might be some information that they give you right out of hand. And yet then you reach that hard shell that will tell you, hey, I don't know you this much yet. We need to work on our relationship first before I can share more about myself. Contrary to that, you have the North American peach, or the Brazilian peach, or the Spanish Portuguese peach. There might be many peaches around the world that would fall into that category, that says, hey, look at me, this is who I am, this is where I work, this is my job title, these are my credentials, this is my family, children, maybe pets, this is where I live, this is where I went to college, this is where I go on vacation, this is where I play golf, tennis, go to the gym. This is me. Take me. I am here to share parts of me because I want to show you that I put trust into the trust account. I make deposits into the trust account. This is me. There's a lot of material you can work with here. Trust me because I want to trust you. Now, when peach and coconut meet, those things don't always gel well, because the coconut thinks, oh, wow, it's already juicy. There's meat. There is substance and sweetness. Great. Nothing hard. That went fast. Amazing. Oh, I'm making friends and I'm making connections quickly. Isn't that great? And then you reach the pit and you hurt your teeth and you figure, wait a second, where did that come from? I thought I was past the hard stuff. Now there's something hard. I don't know if I can trust this peach. you might have led me on. Maybe you're superficial. Typically, one of those attributes that German speakers have of North Americans when they had a bad experience. They like to think of American behavior as superficial. Now, the peach meets the coconut and thinks, what is this? Hard, dry, no sweetness, no juiciness. Ew, what is this? There's nothing to give for me. I'm not sure I like you because you seem to be quite standoffish. And how am I going to build a relationship with you? Right? So who's right, the peach or the coconut? Obviously, both of them are. It's simply mismanaged expectation of how to build and foster the relationship. So this is one of the many models we use in our training programs. Yet we also use models that are a little bit more scientifically based or social science based and empirically researched. So I'm going to show you a model that is quite common in our training programs. We use a cultural comparison framework by the name of GlobeSmart profile, which clusters human behavior into 5 dimensions. You see those horizontal lines. I'm not going to debrief all of them. I'm just going to walk briefly through them. And you see here how I compare the US not only with Germany, but also with Switzerland and Austria. Independent versus interdependent. You could say independent on the left side is I, interdependent is we. So group orientation, independent is more individualistic. That's where you see quite a gap between North America and the German-speaking countries. Egalitarianism or status. Do we have hierarchies? Yes or no? And if we do them, how do we justify them? How do we explain to ourselves and find it acceptable that some people have more power and influence than others? How do we deal with risk and uncertainty? Are we comfortable with it? Or do we need more certainty? How do we communicate more directly or indirectly? And do we value the task at work over the relationship, or is it important for us to build a strong, lasting relationship before we can have the right task done? So this is the GlobeSmart profile. Obviously, there's tons and tons of more depth to this. I'm only showing you the surface level here. But to give you somewhat of an illustration, you can use these dimensions and overlap them with different behavioral approaches. So you see here, the horizontal line is how much confrontation is accepted in communication. And the vertical line says how much emotional expressiveness do certain cultures display in their communication. So you see here, Germany lands in that quadrant of emotionally not very expressive and also confrontation. Okay, you see the US much less confrontational and quite a bit more emotionally expressive. You'll see a spattering of other nation cultures on this grid to make your own comparison. We can also look at an overlap of 2 dimensions, one being the hierarchy dimension, whether we have hierarchies or not, and how do we make decisions? Do we make those decisions top down, meaning the nominal leader says this is what's happening and the rest fall in place, or do we build or come to a decision using a more consensual approach? And again, you see here that the US or the Anglo-Saxon world is in a different quadrant than the German-speaking world. So this is how we use science-based frameworks to explain cultural gaps and help people identify them and to develop tools to overcome them. Now, not everything can be explained with cultural predispositions. Personality weighs into this as much. So when we talk about nation cultures, please keep in mind that this is a somewhat strong oversimplification. Within every culture, there are variants of behavior. However, we already established some common traits, and those common traits often are expressed based on our personality differences. So we also work with a personality profiling instrument called Codebreak or Bank. You see here 4 personality archetypes that come into play and that build a personality profile that we use in connection with a cultural profile. Enough about this in this webinar. We'll dig into this in a training program that we have coming up, and I'll tell you in a little bit about what that training program entails. It will definitely have a personality profiling aspect to it, as well as the culture profile aspect. Now, some of you deal with employees and team members who are being sent overseas to work in different cultures. And whether we do this coming to Germany or from Germany, doesn't matter. It could be any type of combination. This is a sample cost breakdown of what this costs you as an organization to send your experts overseas. And now that humanity has learned to better deal with the COVID threat, we are seeing an uptick in expatriate assignments, which were being held back because of the health situation around the world. So a lot of that pent up demand is now being dispersed again throughout the world. So we typically say for a 3-year global assignment, you can calculate around $2 million of cost, and you see the breakdown here. Some people always ask, hey, well, what's that COLA thing? COLA means cost of living adjustment. So people who work in global mobility, and I know some of you are very familiar with that acronym. So these are the costs that are typically associated with an employee move. And you see that the costs for destination services, so logistical support in the host location, language training, and cultural training and coaching are usually only a sliver of the expense pie here. So I said this before, and I'm okay to repeat this. Are you willing to risk the entire pie? Are you willing to risk your investment into your global employees just because you're going to be a little bit too cheap about the support system that you can make available to your employees? These 1% slivers here are your insurance policy to an expatriate, to a successful expatriate assignment. I mentioned the word cultural intelligence earlier on. I also talked about emotional intelligence, and paired with your IQ, with your subject matter expertise, we come up with this acronym, with this ICE-Q that I have here in this equation. I call it a global growth formula, because you will only be able to grow continuously globally if you factor in these elements. So ICE-Q being one factor, so it's the combination of your subject matter expertise, your cultural intelligence, and your emotional intelligence. Also factors for your global growth are how many business opportunities can you create globally? What is their average deal value? These are all factors that weigh in on the up. On the down, what could be detriment to your growth is how long it'll take you to learn the new things in the new culture, and how many times you fall flat on your face. So we apply ICE-Q in 2 ways. We say, well, your ICE-Q will help you generate more business opportunities, and your ICE-Q, if you work on it, will help you shorten the learning curve and diminish the failure rate. So do the math. If the number above the line gets bigger, and if the number below the line gets smaller, your result of this equation will obviously go up. So ICE-Q isn't a nice to have. It's not what some people call a soft skill. It's an essential power skill that factors heavily in your global growth equation. So I hinted at it. We're going to have a training program that goes much, much deeper into this topic. It will be in March next month, but it'll be quite soon. So it's March. Oh, I can't mark this here. Let me do this. So it's on March 9 and 10, and it will be 2 sessions. It will be a total of 3.5 hours. So it's a live online cultural training program with me. Whether you like it or not, you're stuck with me. It's going to be held on Zoom. So it's 105 minutes for each session, and it will cover everything we highlighted today in a much deeper way. You'll get your own GlobeSmart profile. That will be part of the program. You get your own personality profile. We will do a group and individual debrief of those, and we will show you in the training group how you can get more successful in working with the German-speaking world. Now, you might be asking, well, you're talking big game, but how do we get this? Where do I find this program? How do I sign up? Well, I thought I had it ready, and now I do. There is a link. I'm putting a link in the chat box, and this is where you can sign up for this program. It will be a limited number of seats. We do not offer it to the same amount of people that we have here. So there's quite more of you here in this webinar than we'll be able to seat in the training, because we want to make sure that we give ample time to each of these participants. Yes, Melissa, supporting spouse is key. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And Ellen is laughing about like it or not. Well, sorry. I'm trying to dismantle the myth that Germans don't have a sense of humor. I might have a crooked one, but I thought I was. Sometimes I think I'm hilarious. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. I want to present the information to you in as short a time as possible. So guys, if this is what you need, or if this is what your team members need, I'm posting the link in the chat box one more time. Click this or send me the email to this email, office@theculturemastery.com. Give me a call at this number. If it's busy, leave a message. You know the drill. You've all been trained to do this. I'm here for you. Our company is here to serve you and your teams. If you're doing business with Germans, whether it's in the German-speaking world or outside in the world where you encounter Germans, Swiss, Austrians, Belgians, whatever, who are culturally German, let us know. We're here to help you overcome that obstacle, to close these cultural gaps. I'm checking here, is there any more questions in the Q&A? I think we covered many of those in the chat, but I want to give you 5 more minutes if you want to stay on. I'm happy to answer more questions. If you have them, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function. If not, let me know how many of you I can expect for that training. Remember, March 9 and 10. Limited seats available. Would love to see many of you, or if it's not you, bring your team members, bring your colleagues. Maybe you have suppliers or vendors or customers who would benefit from a training like this. We have some people on this webinar who went through our course. So I'm happy to see you here again. Again, feel free to stay in touch with me. What am I missing here? Alan says it's an evolution, Bruderlein. All right. Melissa says we need so much more of this. Excellent, Melissa. Send your people. Email me, call me. We can set you up with us. Edwin says if we can't make March, will there be another course? Yes, Edwin, there will be. Matter of fact, we can actually have a one-on-one with you to set this up at different dates. Marco is commenting about the current geopolitical situation. Leon, yes, Leon had worked with me. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the shout out. Thanks for the testimonial. Awesome. So with this, if you don't have any more questions now, then I will conclude the session. EU says, when will you have the session available for review, please? It will be on YouTube later tonight. As soon as we've done uploading it, you will get an email with a YouTube link no later than tomorrow. So you should be able to have all of this. With this, we're getting closer to the hour. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for your interest in the topic. And even though Marco was joking, those of you who have connections in the Ukraine and Russia, my heart goes out to you, and I hope we can resolve this issue peacefully, amicably, as soon as possible. The world needs none of this. Thank you very much. This was the Culture Mastery webinar on doing business with the German-speaking world. Thanks for joining us. See you soon next time in one of our training programs. Bye, everybody.